there are 5 on the board cutting techniques that everyone needs to learn. We've got the European style rock chop, the tap chop, push chop, cross chop, and then slicing. In this video, I'm gonna break down some nuance of each of those cutting techniques, and I'm also going to challenge the everyday, what everyone thinks is considered to be the safest cutting technique, and instead encourage you to focus on mastering one over any of the others. And when I say master, I basically mean just be proficient, be confident. That's it. You don't have to go super fast, super crazy. You just need to be able to understand the motions, get your ingredients cut without slicing any of your fingers. Let's get started with, even before the cutting techniques, how to hold your knife and how to position your guide hand. Okay, the pinch grip. You pinch the base of the blade above the handle, above the bolster. So you are touching the blade of the knife, and you let your other 3 fingers wrap around. Looking at it from this perspective, pinch, other 3 fingers wrap around. Pinch, other 3 fingers wrap around. That's the pinch grip. It gives you the most stability and control with your knife, regardless of the knife style. Now, you may see on various videos and cooking shows where people will put their finger off onto the top of the spine of the blade. There are some people who have developed great knife skills with their finger out like that. However, it probably took them a bit to get there. You will gain skills faster, have more stability, control, and better safety by pinching and letting your other 3 fingers wrap around. Slicing, there's times where I will put my finger off to the side of the blade, generally when I'm coming in on an angle or doing more off the board type of cutting techniques. It's more for leverage than laser beaming onto something thinking I'm getting more accuracy. So pinch, other 3 wrap around. Next is your guide hand. Think of the Jim Carrey claw on your board. What you want is the space here between your first and second knuckle to be perpendicular to your cutting board. Your fingertips are coming down at roughly a 45 or so degree angle. It's going to change based off of what ingredients you're working with, how curvy it is, how high off the board, etc. And then you want your thumb to the back side of your hand, which is essentially going to stabilize your product, whether it's a little piece of garlic or a giant potato. Here's the deal. Wherever this goes, the knife will follow. The 4 main ways that people cut themselves. The first is that their fingertips come out like this, boom, bye-bye, especially if it gets in the fingernail. I've done all of these, by the way, so just keep in mind, this is from personal experience, learning over time, and I still cut myself, it happens. So fingertips. The second thing is their thumb creeps up, boop, bye-bye. The third thing is they get a little bit too cocky with a tap or a push or even a rock chop coming up too high. What do? They fillet off the very front of their finger. And then the fourth, and probably one of the most dangerous, would be they try and catch a falling knife. Don't do it. I've done it. My wife did it. She did it. I assure you, the broken tip would have been cheaper to fix than the ER visit that night. That's all I'll say. So when you are holding your knife in the most stable position and then you are guiding it properly with your fingers out of the way and you know where your blade is going, it's a recipe for success. I'm going to be showing you these 5 cutting techniques with potatoes. And the reason why is because 1, they are super cheap. 2, you can take all the bits and pieces, and when you're done, regardless of how big or small they are, and you're gonna see a variety of different shapes and sizes, take them all, throw them in a pot of boiling water, hit it with some salt, turn it on high, boil them until the largest piece is fork tender, strain them, and then make your favorite mashed potato recipe. So you get to practice and then you get to enjoy some mashed taters. Potato. Boil them, mash them, stick them in a stew. I may have said that in my head a million times prepping for this video because I've seen Lord of the Rings probably an unhealthy amount of times. Anyway, let's get started. In no particular order, just because of how we're breaking this down. First, slicing. Think of slicing as there are essentially 3 ways, but you would try to do 1 or 2 of them. The first is where you're just going to come into the product and you're going to pull back towards you. Bowl of cold water, which will prevent my potato pieces from oxidizing. The pieces with the skin, you could peel these, it would be totally fine, but the pieces with the skin, I like to crisp up and super good. Now, I just did my first slice. Round area, look, flat area. Now I have a stable potato to work with. So that one, I basically just pulled down. That is a pull back type of motion that will work for a lot of ingredients. A little bit safer way to do your slice is to do a slight push and then your pull. So look, I'm gonna come in and now my knife is essentially stabilized in the potato. As long as my fingers aren't in front right here, I don't have to worry about coming down on it. So we go in and then pull back. One of the other things that's great about potatoes to practice with is that they have some body to them. They're firm. They're not super hard like a sweet potato, squash, but they're not ridiculously soft, say like garlic. Garlic can be pretty soft, or a button mushrooms, things like that. So it gives you a little bit of resistance, but it's also just, you just got to use your knives with different ingredients and you'll get what I mean. Okay, now we're gonna come over here. The third way that a lot of people slice is they saw. If your knife is sharp and you're working with a raw ingredient like this, fruits, vegetables, you generally don't have to saw. It also depends on the length of your knife, okay? So they do that. You don't need to do that with something like a potato. If you have to do it with a tomato, then your knife is ridiculously dull. So think of slicing as you're just gonna pull back, or you're going to give it a little push and then a pull. That's it. Another thing I'm going to encourage you to do, whether you have a stainless steel or a carbon steel blade, is just give it a quick little wipe down, dry it off in between your use. Okay, so now I have my potato slices. What we're going to do now is take half and half, and we're going to break these down into little sticks, a bat and egg, roughly 1/4 inch or so. I'm going to use this Enzo hand-forged Cutlery just so you can see a completely different type of knife. This is carbon steel. That's why the edge looks like that. It patinas, a Karochi finish with a Kazumi mid blade. Very fine hand-forged Japanese knife. Now what we're gonna do is go into a push chop. So with the push, you're basically coming down into the product at roughly a 45-degree angle. And you finish, depending on what you're cutting, when you hit the board, just a little push forward, the slightest little push. So think of this as you're pushing, you're doing the opposite of that pull slice, but you get a little bit more control and force as you're going into the product. And with that finish of a little bit of a slice, you're basically making sure that you're getting through everything. It really is going to depend on the curvature of the blade that you're using. So here we go. Push. Carbon steel, definitely want to keep it dry in between. I'm going to show you the same thing with a nakiri, which is this boxy small cleaver-esque type of knife. Push, push, push. Now, those potatoes were getting a little wobbly there at the end, which at times can be a little bit of a recipe for disaster. So, if you don't want to stack up wet, sticky items like that and cut as many at a time, don't. Okay, now we saw slice, we saw the push chop. Now we're going to go into a tap chop. A tap chop, tap, 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 tap. You're basically making noise on your cutting board unless you're going super slow. And all you're going to do is come straight down into the product. What's interesting about the tap chop is that it's better to do it faster. The push chop, you can go a bit slower and it feels more natural. But with the tap chop, generally for a small dice, something like this, I'm going to do the push chop because the tap chop, I want a fine julienne, a julienne, or even just a really rough type of chop. So keep that in mind. Let's see if I can do one while also being accurate. Yeah, so what happens is something like this, it's wet and sticky. You end up going and pulling product around and things like that. Let's just finish this off with a little bit of a push. Okay, so the tap chop, I will actually save to show you faster with one of these other ingredients. Well, same ingredient, different potato. Okay, now I'm going to show you the European style rock chop. The rock chop is where the tip of your blade stays on the cutting board at all times. And then you're going to pull up and back, down and forward. Up and back, down and forward. Basically, you're making a circle with your wrist and the tip stays on the board at all times. This is the cutting technique in culinary school, a lot of knife skills classes. This is the technique that they teach you. And they do it because they say that it's safer because the tip of the knife doesn't leave the cutting board. I disagree with that so much. I think that the European style rock chop is one of the more dangerous cutting techniques and it generally leads to bad habits. Now, if you're doing something that's real shallow off your board, you just got a couple pieces like this right here, and you want to come through and do your 1/4 inch, which feels so unnatural to me to do. It's weird, and you have to move and pivot so much. You're dulling your blade for sure. And it's so much extra work. And what happens is because that knife stays on the board, a lot of people think that for whatever reason, it's safer, they're not going to cut themselves. I've seen more people, especially in culinary school, other classmates that were, and I went when I was much older, I was 28. So I was surrounded by a lot of people who had really never cooked much in their lives, let alone developed their knife skills yet, and so many thumbs because of them doing that. And so that European style rock chop, there's a time and a place for it, but I would not recommend doing it when you are trying to do any type of small dice or larger. That cutting technique is going to be best for much finer cuts, like when you have fresh herbs or garlic, anything that you're looking to start mincing. Okay, I'm going to show you what I mean by that. Let's take one of our slices, okay? A couple of them. We'll box that off. Save those. Okay, you have a shallower product in the sense of it's not as high off the cutting board. And you want to cut these real fine, maybe in this case, you want to fry them up, use them as a little crispy garnish. So you need real thin pieces. That is where the European style rock chop is great. Now, earlier I showed you the push chop. Notice I'm coming in on an angle. It's not the tap, it's the push. Get another piece here. Push, rock. What I want you to focus on is the movement. When I push back, push back, push back, push back, push back versus this. There's so much more energy being used to do this rock than this push. So the cutting technique that you've now seen essentially 3 times would be the push. You saw it with the slice, push forward, pull back, push forward, pull back. You saw it with, of course, the push chop. And when you think about the rock chop, you are essentially getting a push. It's just got a little bit of a curvature to it. Push, 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 push. So the cutting technique that I think everyone should focus on learning and mastering, or at least becoming proficient and confident with, is the push chop. Yes, are you bringing your knife off the cutting board and then coming down in? Absolutely. But look, wherever this finger goes, my knife goes. Here's my thumb. Fingertips are pointed away. Push. It is the cutting technique everyone should just learn immediately. Let's say I have a bunch of basil and I'm doing a chiffonade, which is where you stack the leaves, you roll it up, and right there you want real thin little ribbons. A lot of people, especially in culinary school, they said, do the rock chop. Sometimes certain ingredients do require more of an exaggerated push through to make sure that they're slicing everything. It's also going to be determined based off of the size and shape of your blade. But if you just do a more exaggerated push on those same basil leaves, like that, come back further, you're going to be in better shape, I promise you. Now, we saw the push, we saw the rock, we saw slicing. I'm going to do a little bit of a faster tap chop so you can see what I mean. Let's switch the knife up here. I just realized I got my remotes left up here. Just. Bad form, Brandon. Bad form. Let's go back to this Karitsuke. Let's do a tap chop with the tip of the blade. Let's break this down a little bit more. Ready? A quick tap. Now, let's do, let me make some room here. That's a big thing, is making sure you don't clutter your board so you have the ability to move around as needed. Ooh, I'm excited for these mashed potatoes. I might just leave the skin on for all these. I wash these really well. So, okay. Let's do a tap with the mid blade. Slow down at the end. Now, let's go back to this nakiri. So I just flipped the blade over to move my potatoes around. Something good to get in the habit of. If you're using a Wusthof, a Zwilling, a softer steel German blade, you can do a little edge scraping as long as you're honing and maintaining your blade the best you can. Nakiri. The firmer the ingredient, the further back you want to be. Super soft, like even this potato, also depending on the curvature of your knife, you would use more of the front or the mid. It's all going to be up to the knife you're using. I'm telling you, I could pick up a lot of other knives that I have here and I would have to angle and move and position completely differently. This is a petty, which is basically like a longer paring knife or a utility knife. It's petty because it's Japanese, yoshikane. You can use a smaller, shorter blade for doing any of these cutting techniques for the most part. Slice. Now you'll notice that my hands are still pinched. Sometimes I'll come back on the handle a little bit for a smaller blade, but I'm still in that pinch grip position. Let's do a tap, a push, slice, I will not be doing a rock with this blade. And the reason why is this is a much more acute edge. If this Wusthof were like this, that nakiri would be about like that. And then the other two that I have here would be like that. Although they are made with a higher Rockwell, harder steel, that more acute edge actually makes them more prone to chipping and cracking, which leads me to my other reason as to why I think everyone should learn the push chop before anything. Is because if you would like to get into using higher Rockwell, more delicate Japanese knives, then why create a bad habit essentially for those styles of knives? When you get into like the 60 to 61 rock chop, like with this nakiri, you're going to be fine as long as you have a moderately soft, medium soft board like this large black walnut. I would stick under that. I have a whole cutting board video you should check out. I'll link it below if I remember. That will help you. I'm telling you, the cutting board matters a lot. Think about driving on dirt, gravel, sand, asphalt, bumpy asphalt, or an icy road. Like, the surface really matters. That 60, 61 Rockwell, you can get away with a rock chop. Gosh, it feels so awkward because notice how high up off the board I had to bring my wrist and moving it like that. Whereas if I'm just doing the push, it's mainly all in this elbow movement than anything, okay? It's like this, elbow, not wrist and elbow, elbow. Okay, we talked about slicing a little bit, and I think I may have missed the third thing. No, people sawing. Did I get into sawing? I can't remember. If I did, you're just gonna get a quick recap. A lot of people like to saw like this. You do not need to saw unless you're working with a very dense, flexible product. And what I mean by that is, say, last night I was sawing at some chicken breasts. I may or may not have overcooked a little bit. It was a couple days old and I was slicing the super thin pieces and I couldn't just do that or push, pull, push, pull. It was too dense and wiggly and it's just chicken. So I had to do a little bit of that. But for most produce items, I would say the saw is going to come when you're working with certain types of meats, definitely not fish, but larger pieces of meat and depending on the length of your blade. Like if you were to come into this potato, come in, little push, little pull, little push, little pull. See, the potato's super long for this blade. It's doable, but with this, I can just go right into a simple push. Even if I wanted to do a little push and pull, I can. This is, I believe, about an almost 1.5 inches, 2 inches longer than that knife, and it has a straighter edge profile. So what is the best way to slice? It's going to be based off of the ingredients that you are working with. Now, we've got one more cutting technique to wrap up with, and this is your cross chop, pivot chop, your mincing technique, which is generally going to be done with, say, onions, peppers if you need them super fine for any type of salsa. If you are mincing garlic, and probably the most common would be with fresh herbs. So what I'm going to do here is break these down real quick. Okay, quick tap. And now we're going to go into a mince. Don't use a Japanese knife that is above a 60 Rockwell, even on a very soft board like a Hinoki and some of the synthetics like this Hasegawa. You wouldn't even want to do this technique anyway because it could damage the board. Wood board, here's your mincing or your cross chop, pivot. You're going to turn the blade parallel to your board. You're going to pinch the tip. You're still going to stay in the pinch grip. Sometimes you may need to go up on the handle, again, depends on your knife. And you're going to use this as your pivot point, okay? And as you are rocking up and down, you are pivoting. If you do this with a super fine Japanese blade, you're going to wreck it. Kind of like the rock chop, but more pressure. This Enzo HD coming in at that 60 to 61 with a light touch, you probably would be okay on a really soft board, but for this type of cutting technique, you want to go with a good old softer steel German blade. Okay, this is what we're going to do. You want to work with smaller pieces before you really start mincing them finely. So what I like to do is just this rough chop. I don't mind about dragging my blade because whenever I am mincing like this, lift, reposition. Lift, reposition. Say you want to make a little potato hash and you don't have a grater. I mean, there you go. It's pretty much ready to rock. You could throw some onions in here with garlic and do them all at once as well. Or you got a big old bunch of cilantro. This is easier when your product isn't super high off the board, which is why I sliced them thin and then I did that rough chop. Back of the spine to wipe off my fingers there. A little bit of a drag, doesn't matter. Flatten them out and go. Okay, now let's say you have a super fine Japanese blade like this Enzo Handforge Aogami Super coming in at a 64 to 65 Rockwell compared to that 56 to 58 Rockwell of that Wusthof Ikon. Fantastic knife. Great for rock chop, positioning, cross chop. But for a Japanese blade like this, let's say that I need fine pieces of herbs. Then what I'm going to do, say take those herbs, I'm going to roll them up, and then I'm just going to go into a super, super fine push chop. Let's say you just even want to do that with your POE-TAY-TOES. Now, you take everything that you just sliced up, turn it, and then look. Is the mince or cross chop, that pivot motion with that real fast up and down bounce, going to allow you to maybe cut a little bit more, a little bit faster? Absolutely. And if that's something you need to do, then use a softer steel German blade. Or like a Yaxel Japanese blade coming in at a 59 Rockwell stainless steel, super easy to hone and maintain. You could do something like that. But look, here's my push chop, not a rock chop. Minimal motion in my hand, except for the end here. Things get a little bit close to your fingers. So you gotta, I am bunched up super tight like this, but my thumb is still back here and my fingers are still on an angle. If this were cilantro, which I do this all the time, if you want to see more knives in action and different ingredients, check out the prep sesh or first use videos, which I'll link the playlist below as well, because you'll get to see how I would do this with cilantro or parsley, apple, a bunch of different things. Now, aside from this little piece, we'll just pretend you didn't happen. No rock chop. And I've got some super fine pieces of potato that will be great to crisp up and use as a garnish. Make a little potato hash, mix in with some scramble, whatever you want to do. And I didn't dull my blade while doing that. I think that essentially wraps up my 5 cutting techniques. We talked about the slicing motion, which is where you are either going to pull or you're going to push-pull. And in some cases, it feels very weird doing this, but you will saw. Then we talked about the push chop. Push, 45-degree angle into the board. It's all in your elbow and your arm moving, not your wrist. You can do this for a finer julienne, a small dice, large dice. Even if you just have a bell pepper that you need to cut in half, you don't necessarily need to slice those if you have a sharp knife. But here's the thing. Even if you can do that in one motion, your push, you're still slicing. Or you can slice, push, and pull. Or you can just do a quick tap depending on what you're doing. But that push, you're working with the knife, you're working with that force and leverage. And when I say force, I don't mean like, you're working with physics. I know a ton about physics. We have the rock chop. Better for finer slices. Doing a wider 1/4 inch or so, that pivot at the top of the blade, it's just unnatural. It feels weird. So do your wider chops with a push. Reserve that rock chop for when you absolutely need it, depending on the type of knife. And here's the thing. I think this is why it's my biggest bugaboo with the rock chop. This. And I see it all the time. I see it in videos on social media and YouTube all the time. Someone takes a large product that's 2.5 inches off the cutting board and they do this. Look how high up my wrist is going. It's so awkward and unstable. I see it all the time because they think that tip is put safe and happy. No, it's not the case. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up with just some push and tap chop ASMR. That's it. And if you want to know more about cutting techniques and skills and just becoming more confident with your knives, then be sure you subscribe. We've got a lot of videos that talk about different things throughout. Even if I'm not necessarily talking about knife cutting techniques or things like that, a lot of the times I throw little tidbits, tips and tricks all throughout. Here we go. I'm Chef Brandon with Cutlery More. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you learned something. I hope you learned something new if you've already been using knives for a while. And the biggest thing is I hope that this lesson and your effort on your board is going to allow you to become more confident in your kitchen. The better confidence you have with your knives, the more confidence that you're going to have attacking most ingredients and most recipes. And it all starts right here. The cooking aspect, you can always add a little salt or cover up a bad recipe with some extra hot sauce. But it really all starts right here. Yeah, right here. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the remaining cuts. Boil 'em, mash 'em, stick 'em in a stew.